Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, January 14, time in Texas, about 11 a.m. Some of the things we'll cover today. The astronauts on the ISS were brain hit. That's why they're coming home. Epstein, the Clintons are a no-show. And President Trump deals with the deep state Fed, Greenland, which we need for our security, and other top items. And we have the U.S. military preps for a strike on Iran, and Cuba and Mexico, Greenland. Gear up, baby. So we have this going on. Now, a few days ago, we heard about the ISS, the International Space Station. We heard about 4 U.S. astronauts returning to Earth. That'll happen today about 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What we're now learning is the medical emergency was the ISS was hit by some type of space, could have been meteor, could have been microwaves. We still have that intelligently controlled object atlas out in space, against which the U.S. military and SpaceX are putting up a solid line of defense around Earth to block the radio signals. Can it be that this atlas projected some type of weapon against the ISS? That's unknown. But what's coming out now from geophysicist Stephen Burns is that a few days ago, and that would correlate to when we began hearing that one of the astronauts was injured or had a medical emergency, that the ISS was hit, causing brain concussion-like effects on the astronauts. Now, I put out in my video, I believed that very soon we would see the ISS shut down. We know the 4 U.S. astronauts are returning to Earth today. That leaves 1 American and 2 Russians on the ISS. I believe we'll see very soon that those astronauts will also return to Earth and ISS will be put on autopilot. Why? Because there is something going on in space. And today, according to NASA, we can have a G1, G2. This is from the 2 CMEs that came off the far side of the sun. Now today we have the sun turning to face the Earth with large sunspots, which could generate additional geomagnetic energy. I submit the combo of the solar activity in the next few days, plus an unknown impact from an intelligently controlled object atlas on the International Space Station could then produce additional negative impacts upon the remaining astronauts. So we'll have to see, and it's good to be in prayer. And we have this. So yesterday and the day before, President Clinton was to appear at a congressional hearing regarding the Epstein files. And yesterday, I believe it was HRC, they both were no-shows. So today, the House is going to vote on recommending to the DOJ to indict the Clintons. Of course, the House must have a majority vote, so today, none of the Democrats showed up. What's going on with that? And we have this. So, Prometheus update is giving additional information. Now we know, we can see as the American people, we have multiple cards on our table. We saw President Trump going to Venezuela, and we know, we understand Cuba is also on the chopping block, as is Mexico. Now, all of these areas present money that goes to some segments of Russia, China, and also Iran. These would be black type accounts. So President Trump is in the position now of playing multiple cards, or some would say moving pieces on the chessboard. So first had to come a takedown of oil and cartel money. Now we know inside Iran, some segments of Russia, China, and Iran had military assets there for Venezuela to use against the U.S. military. The same is true in the cartels in Mexico, mostly Chinese equipment and troops. So that's going on. And we have also inside the U.S., we know we have sleeper cells, primarily Iranian, but also Chinese and some segments of Russia. That's going on. So President Trump has had a big plan. First, to cut the oil and money that goes to some segments of Russia, China, and Iran. And I have additional information. Recall, and the U.S. military in the Caribbean continues to take control of tankers in the Caribbean. Recall, that tanker we saw operating called the Bella, that was right after the U.S. hit Venezuela and took Maduro, called the Bella, that had been flagged out of Guyana. But then, as it pulled away from Venezuela, changed its name to the Marinera, and changed its flag to Russia. Then, we saw the tanker going from the Caribbean to the North Atlantic. And we were hearing from the mainstream media. Now, you can get from the mainstream media a tiny bit of truth embedded in a lot of untruth, that Russia was sending, they were sending 2 ships and 1 sub to take control of the Marinera. The mainstream media put forth this was a Russian vessel. Nothing could have been further from the truth. This is what actually happened, is the Marinera Bella, also renamed Marinera, had no oil on it. That was obvious from the position it was in on the ocean. It was sitting high, no oil. We come to find out that what it had on it was 2 nuclear devices that the deep state, so it had 2 nukes, and they were made of isotopes that came from Russia. This was a deep state operation. Recall last year, we had up and down the U.S. East Coast nuke sniffers, and we saw over New Jersey many drones. Now, it was put forth that apparently they were looking for nukes, but no one knew what was the source? The source was these two nuclear devices with isotopes from Russia that the deep state had put or taken or stolen somewhere. But the U.S. intel community knew that the target was the U.S. East Coast. So now new intel came out that this tanker near Venezuela, and obviously we can see the deep state plan would have been to allow the U.S. military to take control of the Bella and then take it to the U.S. and have it blow up. But we saw what happened was the U.S. military, Coast Guard, said to Bella, stop and let us board, and the Bella ran. The Bella continued to be shadowed by the U.S. Coast Guard while additional U.S. military assets could be flown out to the Bella to take charge of it. Russia cooperated with the U.S. and sent those two ships and submarine not to take the Bella, but to hold the Bella until the U.S. military could take control of the tanker and the two nuclear devices. So we see Russia working with the U.S. to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. So when you hear bits of truth embedded in much a container of lies on mainstream media, it's good that you can go to independent sources who also hear from God. So that's going on. Yeah, baby. We came very close to a nuclear false flag in the U.S. Blame it on Russia then for the U.S. to go to war with Russia. Nothing could be further from the interest of America in having a full-on war with Russia. But the deep state is intent on destroying America and Russia. So we have this, that the Promethean update, the U.S. military has a risk plan, and that is being done through President Trump's ending 80 years of the deep state control of money. That includes the Federal Reserve. So we see President Trump cutting oil and money from Venezuela and other locations that would go to China, some segments of Russia, and Iran, a deep state group. And he has cut it from Venezuela. And now this money cut is also impacting the deep state. So we have in the U.S., we have the Federal Reserve that is not a part of the U.S. government, and yet the U.S. Congress votes to send money. So Congress sends money to the Federal Reserve, which is not a part of the U.S. government. It is a deep state controlled monster orchestrating the economy of the U.S. The Fed has to be also taken down. Now, how does this Fed operate? We know in the UK and London, there's an area called the City of London. This is the deep state control, global financial control center by the deep state. Even the Queen, to go into this area of London, had to take her shoes off and ask for permission. It is not a part of London nor the UK. It is a deep state-controlled global financial center. And that same group, City of London, for example, when we pay money to the IRS that's located in Puerto Rico, we the American citizens, that money goes here to the City of London. It comes back to the Federal Reserve in the form of a loan to America with interest. I submit this. The so-called U.S. debt is entirely fake. So that's going on. So President Trump's big plan, hit Venezuela, take down the money from oil and the cartels, and we're seeing also the U.S. military and other nations standing up now to stop shipments of drugs, cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, plus going on. And it is the U.S.-led and a multinational effort to destroy the deep state. So the Fed needs to be taken down. And we have this. Yeah, President Trump is working with other nations to destroy the deep state. An enemy of the U.S. is certain parts of both the UK and Canada. We have enemies in Canada who are part of the deep state. And the deep state certainly has players inside the U.S. So the U.S., the people of America need to take down the Federal Reserve and all the central banks in the U.S. who are not a part of the U.S. government, nor a part of the U.S. banking system, but are wholly operated by foreign institutions operated by the deep state. So that's going on. We'll see a big change, I believe, in our banking system in the next 12 months. So we have this, President Trump is to ban. He's also trying to help young Americans be able to afford houses. I know I was having a recent conversation with my family, and it's phenomenal how the value of houses has risen in the past 20 years, not based on actual increase in value, but President Trump now is banning foreign companies like BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard from buying up single-family homes in the U.S. to drive up the price, and is ordering a mandatory buyback from these foreign companies, a buyback from them, forcing them to sell the single-family homes they own now, and increasing what's going on with Fannie Mae and Freddie to bring down the pricing of single-family homes so young Americans can also participate in the American dream. Way to go, President Trump. And we have this regarding the military-industrial complex in the U.S. Lockheed and other companies that are supposed to manufacture military equipment for the U.S. military. We've long known for decades, and we heard as early as the 1950s, a warning message from President Eisenhower that the U.S. military-industrial complex posed a clear and present danger to America. Now, these companies are supposed to be producing U.S. military weapons, But what they do is suck at the trough of greed. They receive billions of dollars from the U.S. Congress. Then they use that money to buy their own stocks, run up the value of their stocks, to put their greedy gain in their own pocket. And we can see, we have heard for years, the U.S. military-industrial complex. Oh, we can't produce this. We're over budget. We need more money. It's going to take years to get that produced. The American people are awake and are going very soon to demand that Congress cut this BS out. Why? Because right now, the U.S. faces threats from multiple nations militarily. We need to have a pro-America manufacturing base to make U.S. military weapons, ammo, and so on. So President Trump is not afraid to stomp the chest of the U.S. military complex, which has turned to evil instead of benefiting America, and does pose a threat to our military security. So way to go, President Trump. And we have this. So today, there's going to be a meeting. So we have the U.S., we have Greenland. Now, we've been hearing President Trump say from the time he was elected that the U.S. needs Greenland for our strategic security. He is absolutely correct. And these propagandists who are saying, no, there's no Russian and Chinese ships around Greenland, we can now say, shut up. And today, in the White House, is going to be a meeting with Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, President Trump's envoy, Witkoff. And this is going to be with the foreign ministers of both Greenland and Denmark. President Trump, I got this suggestion. If Denmark will not sell Greenland, which we know without a shadow of a doubt now that new information has come out, Denmark knows that Greenland is vital for the security not only of America, but also of Europe. If they will not sell, then take it tomorrow by force, because America does need Greenland. We need to be able to control Greenland militarily for the safety and security of American families. And we have, so they're meeting today. We don't know what time. Now, with regard to the U.S. economy, Dr. William Mount brings this out. He says the Fed is part of the U.S. Treasury. Well, maybe that's true on paper, but we see that President Trump cannot fire the leader of the Fed, Jerome Powell. So that would tend to suggest that the Fed is not a part of the U.S. government. And we have this. President Trump has also said to credit card companies, you must stop these high interest rates you are charging American citizens, and for the coming year, 12 months, you can only charge 10% interest. not the illegal amounts of 20 to 30%. We see credit card companies also being greedy bastards. And we know bastard from Deuteronomy means someone not of God. So we see the credit card companies in America operating against American citizens. So President Trump, make that happen. And we have this, that the, and this is my question. If the Fed is not a part of the U.S. government, why does Congress vote to send money to the Fed? That we, as I've been demonstrating, is not a part of the U.S. government, but is a deep state controlled monster manipulating the U.S. economy. President Trump, shut the Fed down. And while you're shutting down the Fed, also shut down the UN that's located in New York. And take America out of all these deep state controlled globalist organizations, the UN, NATO, the World Bank, and so on. So we have this. So now President Trump has directed the DOJ to bring an indictment against the leader of the Fed, Jerome Powell, because he went to a congressional hearing because the Fed received money from Congress, even though it's not part of the U.S. government, to renovate its building. And President Trump had information that it was running billions over, or there was a question about where did billions of dollars go. So now President Trump has directed the DOJ to indict Jerome Powell. So we see President Trump taking steps to take down the Fed, a monster feeding off the U.S. Economy and the American people. So that's going on. And we have this. So President Trump, today's Greenland, Denmark meeting at the White House. President Trump is so far not said to be attending that meeting, but rather Vance, Rubio, and Witkoff. And we have this. President Trump is also prepping for other moves. This will be against Cuba and Mexico, and definitely Iran. I have a whole segment on Iran. So we have this, that the U.S. preps definitely for a military conflict with Iran. And President Trump has succeeded in cutting oil and cartel money to China, Iran, Cuba, Mexico, and so on. And so this is just coming out. So to all those naysayers who say, oh, there are not Russian and Chinese ships around Greenland. Really? Well, this comes from Stickwell's aggregate site, the source Just In News. Just last month, the Denmark Intel Service, Danish Defense Intel Service, released their Intel Risk Assessment report for Denmark, and this would include Greenland, and they released it last month. And Intel Outlook for 2025, which was just released this January, I guess that would have been in December. And what did the Danish Intel Service report? They reported that the Chinese military objective is to take Greenland by force and present definitely a risk for Europe and Denmark. So to those naysayers, there are no Chinese and Russian ships out there around Greenland that pose a threat to America. Shut up. The Denmark Intel Service put their report out and said, yes, a military objective of China is to take Greenland militarily by force. So hopefully the government of Denmark has a little bit of common sense and will take the money the U.S. says it will pay for Greenland. And I say this to President Trump today in this meeting: if you can't reach an agreement for the U.S. to buy Greenland from Denmark, tell Denmark to take a hike and put the U.S. military on Greenland tomorrow to take it by force. We cannot allow Chinese bombs to be hitting the U.S. from Greenland. So that's going on. And we have this from the BBC. Now we'll start talking about what is a clear and present danger to the U.S. and to Israel. So we have Israel. We have Iran. Iran has a border with Turkmenistan and also Afghanistan. All right, what's going on there? And many people believe that we have tens of thousands, if not millions, of individuals inside Iran who are Christians and who are being slaughtered by their own government. So we have this from BBC. Iran begins January 14 today. They had 5-minute trials yesterday for hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters that the military of Iran had arrested. 5-minute trials. Sentenced them to death, and they are to begin hanging hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters today or tomorrow. We have this from CBS. From a Iranian female activist, Maish Al-Anid, who reported inside Iran there are up to 12,000 dead. Now, just this morning, on European sources, it's being put forth, official count, 2,500 protesters killed by the Iranian military. However, other European sources with contacts inside Iran are saying it's at least 12,000 plus. So that's going on. And we're hearing that many of the IRGC, so yesterday flying out of Iran to Turkey, were many leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So they're leaving. Where is the Ayatollah? The Ayatollah, it's believed, is right here on the eastern border of Iran with Afghanistan in an underground bunker that leaves the lower level government leaders, the mullahs, the lower level Iranian military in charge. And they are using machine guns to take down and kill hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters right now, while they build gallows to hang many. So that's going on. And we have this, that from CBS. Yeah, Iran is to begin hanging protesters today. It's believed at least 12,000 are dead. Fox, they had commie Dem Chuck Schumer say, why is the U.S. military going to be in Iran? Shut up, Chuck Schumer. You are communist to your core. You could care less if innocent Christians and innocent people inside Iran are killed, most likely because it doesn't put any more money in your pocket. And now we have this. Chuck Schumer. Well, we need to use the War Power Act to control the executive branch. That would be President Trump, whose constitutional role also includes commander-in-chief. Now, Chuck Schumer could care less if Iran is murdering its own population, or if Iran has sleeper cells it wants to activate to kill American citizens. If it isn't putting money in his pocket, he could care less. And Chuck Schumer, President Trump, we need to have term limits, because definitely Chuck Schumer would be out. So that's going on. And the Dems also try to withhold money from the DHS for additional ICE employees. We see the communist Dems openly displaying their greedy communist intent by trying to delay or take down the ability of the U.S. government to protect American citizens. The commie Dems also have to go. We have this from Hal Turner's intel that came from inside the U.S. intel, that the Pentagon has a plan to strike Iran, and President Trump is very serious about this. Now, that was yesterday. Today, we're supposed to begin seeing the Iranian military hang protesters in the streets. And we have this, that Iran has made a threat to hit U.S. military bases that are inside the Middle East. That would be in Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. I think we have some in Iraq, in Jordan. So the Iranian military is, once they get on their position to strike militarily, they're going to hit Israel. They're going to also hit, they threaten, U.S. military bases. Now we understand that the U.S. military is evacuating U.S. military out of Middle East bases. Apparently, the U.S. military takes the threat by Iran to hit our bases seriously. So that's going on. And we have this, that the U.S. Last night, about this intel came out last night about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The U.S. has surged refuelers, that's the KC-135, and the U.S. military puts the refuelers in the air, and their objective is to refuel fighter jets. So these so before you have a military engagement, you send out your refuelers. And they went from Hawaii over to Diego Garcia, where the U.S. has a base. Diego Garcia is near India, and then also Afghanistan and Iran. So from Hawaii to Diego Garcia. They sent the refuelers. And then yesterday, about 6 p.m., Eastern Standard Time, President Trump went into an emergency meeting regarding Iran. And present was Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of War Hegseth, CIA Director Ratcliffe, DNI Tulsi Gabbard. We have the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, and Vice President Vance. So that was an emergency meeting last night about 6 o'clock. About 10 o'clock then, we saw the refuelers being moved from Hawaii to Diego Garcia. So we had last night also about 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have that the U.S. military was sending out along the coast of Iran. So the U.S. military was sending out MQ drones. These are large drones. Some of them are almost the size of small planes. And they do strategic surveillance and signals intel to take, an active battle map of Iran and to put together real-time strike packages. Now, this happened last night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, while President Trump's emergency meeting began about 6 p.m. The U.S. strike authorization has been given, and it is being staged. So that's going on. And the U.S., President Trump, has suspended all talks with Iran. We have sources inside Iran. The death count for the protesters is 12 to 14,000. And 5-minute trials were held yesterday with hundreds, maybe thousands, to be hanged today or tomorrow. The Iranian people prep for a standoff. So before these protests began about 17 or 18 days ago, the Iranian people had been in the planning stage for a revolution. It's my position. I believe the Iranian people have reached a position in their hearts to be martyrs, similar to what happened in America during our Revolutionary War. Give us liberty or give us death. So, before this current revolution began, about 17 or 18 days ago, the Iranian people had made plans, and they took down at the beginning of the protest hundreds of cameras the Iranian government had on the streets. They had also secured guns. We don't know what kind, but the Iranian people have also been shooting dead Iranian military and police who were firing on them. So that's going on. But the Iranian military and police have machine guns, so they're able to take out many more of the protesters. So that's going on. And we have this. The IRGC yesterday and the day before began flying out of Iran to Turkey. The Ayatollah Khamenei is in his hidey hole, an underground bunker located along the eastern border of Iran with Afghanistan. So that's going on. And the U.S. military began yesterday evacuating people, its troops, out of its Middle East bases in the Middle East. Now, it's probable that Iran, now that it's bereft of the leadership of the Ayatollah, they're not on the ground with the Iranian military, nor are the IRGC individuals. So it would be unknown what level of military is in control now of the Iranian military. So it would also be unknown what type of response they could put up to America. But it's good to be in prayer. And here's a short prayer based on Isaiah 17. On that day, all who fear God will look to him with eyes of respect, understanding only God can deliver from the evil facing the people of America, Iran, and Israel. We pray, Father, for the U.S. military to be strengthened, guided, and increase their perseverance. And we in America understand that we stand as an instrument of God's reckoning against the evil in the world. And we thank you, God the Father, God the Son, Jesus, whom many call Yeshua, and God the Holy Spirit. I say to my family and friends, remain steady out there. Continue to pray. God is in charge, and he is on the move. I love you, and I'll see you soon.